2 seconds.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do training. First of all, I want to do a training. I'm not doing training on the new features. We did that the other day, where you can actually download the webinar, the videos, and look at how to set up your EFTs and your new IP address situation, host to host, etc. That is not what this training is. This training is really to just go through the rules of RecXpress, because obviously the whole point of having RecXpress and having the rules is for you to have automated your client's bank recon to the point where they do not have to actually do anything. All they want to do is import, check certain things, and then post, and then that's the end of their cash book. And that's the whole idea of RecXpress, is to completely and utterly remove as much interaction with their data as possible. And that's why I thought, let me just go through the rules once again with you. And you can watch the video with the client. You see, you can take the video to your client, show them this, and they will get a much better understanding of how to do their rules and how to streamline the product. Okay, so our first slide is really an explanation of the power of rules, and I've written this in a bit of detail on purpose, so you can actually read this to the client themselves and tell them this is how it's meant to work. So there are many bank transactions that aren't entered into cash book when you bring in your bank statement. For example, bank charges, interest, and stop orders. When you import these transactions, RecXpress recognizes them as no match in the product, in the cash book itself. So they haven't been entered at all by anybody into the system. So they're coming in straight from their bank statement. Okay. If you have created all the necessary rules, RecXpress will then able to automatically add them to the cash book for you. So this is the whole point, is that these transactions you're importing have not gone to the cash book, but with a rule, it will automatically put the default values to that particular transaction and create a batch for you. That's a huge advantage and much easier to do than doing it manually. RecXpress will allow you to create rules that identify the transactions that are not matched based on its transaction code or its actual reference. And that's the matching system we're using. I think most of you, this is more of like a refresher, but it is nice to know how they all work and to give the client these notes so they don't have to get too much training and they understand how it works. Once you have defined these rules, RecXpress will fully automate the reconciliation process and have no user intervention necessary when doing your import. Obviously, that's nothing's perfect, but you can get up to a 99.9% matching process, and that is a huge, huge advantage to the client. So that is the main objective of RecXpress, not just to do your recon, but to actually allow you to create transactions on the fly and not have to enter them into the cash book. Total automation, no user errors, and a complete reconciliation in a matter of minutes, not days. Okay, that's a bit of a sales wrap that you can throw in at the end, which is actually the point of the product. Okay. So where do you start? Okay, and this is always a good question. Where do you start? Where do you start creating the rules? At what point do you set it up, and where do you go from there? So the first thing you want to do is you have a bank format that you've given to Peresoft, or it's already been created. So we have multiple bank formats already created, and with the new cash book, when the bank sends you a bank statement now using the IP address of your that you can fetch automatically, that format has already been developed for multiple banks and is already available. And then there's not even an import required. So they just fetch the statement automatically or retrieve it, and then when they want to actually do the recon, they then fetch from the temporary file and bring it into the product. Okay, so that is the bank formats that we create. Okay. When we create the bank format, we also get all the transaction codes from the bank for that particular bank, and those are attached to that bank statement. And those transaction codes are categorized into different categories that we have set as default categories, like, for example, transactions like bank charges, interest, etc. So that comes with your bank format, 9 different sets of categories. Okay, I'll explain to you in a minute about the categories when you create the rules. The 9 transaction codes are the basis of the first rules that we create automatically for your client. So straight away, when you add your template, which I'll show you in a minute, it creates those particular categories for you, puts those transaction codes that are for that particular category, and allows you to use those as rules. Okay, As you use the product, you will continue to customize these categories and rules. So you're able to define better rules for your customer until it has got a rule for just about every single transaction that comes from your bank statement. So you keep building on the rules we give you, keep adding, and eventually after a month or 2 or 3, you have defined just about every single transaction with every single rule available. You do understand you start with a skeleton that gives you the basic rules that are required, and that is the starting point for your client. So I like this because the client doesn't have to do anything at this point. Boom, la-di-da, create your template, and we have already got a skeleton for you with the rules created. Okay, the transaction codes we get, by the way, from the bank. Okay, I'm going to show you quickly now. This is where this demo becomes fun. Okay, I'm going to go now to my server, and I'm going to show you live. Okay, so here we've got all our bank formats. Okay, and you can see we now at Nedbank over here, and then on the right we have already got all their transaction codes set up, and we then create default categories for those. So for example, you can see there's a lot of transaction codes for bank charges. So we've already done that for you, and all these transaction codes will be under the category bank charges. You are able to change your categories here, but I wouldn't recommend that. I think the place to change it is when I show you at the end of the training how to move around your categories a bit more flexibly. Okay, so here you've got all your transaction codes, and you can see that they've already been allocated to the different categories that they fall under. Okay, now, if you want to, you can also add your own transaction codes. Now, I don't think you've known this, but we've added the transaction codes, but there might be new ones that the bank wants, and you can add them here. Okay, and when you add a new transaction code, you can put anything there as a transaction code. You can even put a transaction code called, let's just go with a BC. Okay, so you could now create your own transaction code that you bring in. So this is very useful when you're using a format that is a free format. So you could create your own format, and you can then export the transactions from the bank into your format, and then you can create your own transaction codes and then add them to your format yourself. Okay, and we do have formats that aren't bank specific. For example, we do have formats that are global, like bank. We have a reference. I'll just show you in a minute. Reference. Let's just go there for a second. Let's not add that there. I'm not going to add it. Okay, so for example, yeah, we have what we call global formats. Okay, and these formats are generalized formats. Okay, and if you look here, there's a format here. I'm just trying to see if it's here. And no, it isn't under global. I think it's under South Africa. And what that is, a very basic format. So you can also export the transactions yourself and build up your own import file. Okay, so let me just go to a format here that is generalized. You can see I'm not, this, as I said, this is more of a training scenario. So let's just go reference now. Looking for a reference. You can see there's not here. It's not that simple to find. I thought you would have put them under thing. Anyway, the point is you can create your own like reference date, reference amount, and then you can you see where that is? I can't find that now. Here we go. Sorry, it was under global here. So for example, here's a very, very simple format. So you might want to export a statement that has no real export format except in CSV. So what happens here is you've got date reference amount, and then it's got its own transaction codes, obviously, that you're going to set up in the date reference amount field. You might not have even a transaction code, but you can, if you want to, then go, for example, here. Okay, let me go back to here quickly. Go to your transaction codes here. Let me see what the number is. Under global 149. Global. What is it? We just choose format name will be date. DATE. Date reference amount. And then you can go here, and if you want to, you can add your own transaction code. Create another one, number 10. Okay. Test. Oops. Okay, and you might say when I bring in test, test. Okay, I can then bring in something here like adjustments, and then that will then compile the format itself, and you can then save that. And now you've got more transaction codes in that particular example. This one doesn't have a transaction code, where this 142 here does have a transaction code. Okay, so that would be the place you'd want to add it for that one. Okay, cool. That's just something I'm just showing you out of interest. So you can add your own transaction codes, and you can also create your own format. Okay, so you don't have to have a bank format that's been predefined. You can then just create a generalized format. Okay, so I'm just showing you that screen in the actual PPT itself. So I'll just in that here are the screens, just to give you an idea of what we were looking at. Cool. Now, before I create a template, I'm just going to say to you now, with all our sample data comes standardized with a particular format and a particular template. Okay, so what happens is, if you want to show the client some sample data that is live, you can download our sample data, you can install, and then you can download the actual PPT that's specific to that sample data. And it gives you all the different examples in the sample data, and you can actually go through the whole process of importing, the whole process of reconciling, etc. And one of the templates we do create in our sample data, sorry, wrong one, is the template called sample. Sample, whoops, sorry, wrong one. Got a cable in my ear. I can see a cable, because I read up on the internet that if you use the AirPods, it transmits a certain frequency into your brain and can kill you. So now I'm using a cable, and of course a cable just gets in the bloody way, doesn't it? Really? It's insane. Okay, so it keeps getting in the way. Okay, so if you go to sample, it's already got a proper template called sample, and all the rules already have been created for you with GL accounts and different compare methods. But I'll go through it with you in a minute. Okay, but when you create a new one, let's go sample one now. A new sample one. Let's go new here. Let's start again. One. Okay, you can then attach your bank format to that sample. Okay, so let's just attach the first one I can see here, which is National Bank Australia, or let's just go to Nedbank, the one I use. I like Nedbank, and I'll tell you why I use Nedbank. It's because the Nedbank business format, Netbank, it's actually funny if they call it Netbank. The Netbank business format has got a lot of transaction codes, and you'll see it takes a few minutes. So when I do that, and when I add this, it automatically goes and adds all the transaction codes, as you can see over here, to this format, to this template. So that's what you start with, and that's where your beginning point is for the client. And you can see it's adding a huge amount of transactions, actually 300 transaction codes, 300 different transaction types that go into your bank format. Cool. So now it's created each one. So if you go right here to interest, there are all the interest transaction codes. You can now add your GL accounts and your compare methods, etc. If you don't have a compare method, it will use the transaction code as its compare. But I'm going to show you that in the next slide. So all you'd have to do here, for example, if you want to, you could let's just go to a bit more realistic one. Let's go to bank charges as a category. Okay, and here, for example, let's put a source code in of BC. Okay, and then adds the bank charges. You see, obviously I'll set up BC with its default values. If you look at BC here, it's already got default values in it. It picks them all up and it will put them into the rule for you. So when you import a transaction with 05, I'll show you as well how it works. It will then bring in and match it to the BC and account code, and you'll then create a batch, which will have all these default values already available for you. Okay, cool. So it's very easy to do. Your first setup for the client. Right. Okay, so let's go back here. So this is this template screen I've shown you, and obviously it's going to just give you a refresh of or you can see I've already got a lot of different types of compare methods available that the client can use or you can use to understand exactly how they work. Cool. So I'm gonna go to the next screen now. If you have questions while I'm in the middle of something, just ask. It's your golden opportunity now to get the knowledge from me. I'm sitting here, I'm dying to show my product to you. It's something I'm very proud of. Peresoft's very proud of this product. It's one of the products that really saves time for your client. I mean, it really has changed my month. I'm sure Murty would put up a hand there and say it's changed her life. I promise you, really, it's a major difference. Okay, right. So let's look at the rules. Okay, so for a rule to work, it needs to know what to look for. RecXpress therefore allows you to compare certain information against the imported transaction, and based on that matching, attach the rule defaults to that transaction. The methods we use are as follows. Okay. The basic rule is just the transaction code on its own, and then it picks up, as I was showing you a minute ago with bank charges, it just picks up the defaults and applies it to that transaction code. That is probably the most basic one and mostly used for bank charges, interest, standard transactions. You don't need a description. They just go to that particular interest account. They go to that particular bank charge account. You don't have to start worrying about a description like plumbing or something, or food or something, you know what I mean, or something specific. That is always bank charges. So that's a basic rule, and that's what comes with a standard template create. When you start getting more clever and more fancy and you want it to be a bit more specific, you are allowed to then create compare methods. And the compare methods available are 4 different compare methods. The one is the first method, which is just an equal sign. And the equal is like, for example, a check number. That's pretty straightforward, or not a check number. It will be, let's just look at, so let's say equal sign, which, by the way, I'd never use. Nothing is always the same description, because the bank, for some bizarre reason, when they post transactions each month, they either put a standard description and then they put some kind of like a unique reference number after it. Okay, so the equal sign, I must be honest with you, hardly used. The most used one is the next one, which is a like command, which is the same as a contains. Okay, and that matches predefined words in the reference. So, and I will go into much more detail in a minute as to how that works, as well as how the equal works with question marks and the like with question marks. Because what we added was some references have only the first 4 words are the same, and then the next 3 are numbers, etc., etc. So we added the question marks to keep it within a certain like command, and we've also added a question mark where the first 4 are the same, and then you have different words, letters afterwards. But I'm going to go into a lot more detail on the next slide. Okay, so there are your basic rules, is by transaction code, and then you have a compare method. Okay, right. So here's the first rule. Basic rule, transaction code. So here we go. Service fees always go to bank charges, and it doesn't have a description. There's no need for a like command. And that is 005 in this case for this particular format. And it's in the transaction here. This is the imported transaction here. And there is 005. It finds it, picks it up, and goes BC 66110, and it goes straight to that transaction, to that GL account. Most simplest basic rule that you can create. Okay. There's nothing fancy here. This is very straightforward. And this is where you will start with your client. The next one, okay, is an equal. Okay. And this is an equal sign saying anything with that particular description must go to, and again, certain default codes. Now, this one happens to be the name of a accounts receivable customer, which I will show you in a bit more depth. And therefore, it matches to the customer's description, which is always going to be courtyard. Okay. Again, unlikely, but you never know. It might be the same every month. If it's the same, you can use the equal sign. But much more flexible than the equal sign, okay, will be the like. So, for example, here's a reference that doesn't just have X side in it, so you can't use an equal sign. But you can say it contains X side. So here's a number. It's got an invoice note. The client types in when they do their payment. They say beneficiary description. They put in invoice 12345, and the guy typing and thinks, well, they don't know where the invoice is, so let me give you my name as well. Okay, so they put an invoice dash and then the name of their company, and which is nice for you when you bring it in, because then you know it's for XI batteries, which is again in our sample data. And again, it also picks up the transaction code, which happens to be deposits, or it happens to be payments, which is 064, okay, account payment. Okay, now you can see here that 064 is not just used for XI, it's also used for Gould and for some other matching as well. So you can put as many transaction codes as you need of the same within a certain category. Okay, so let me just give you a brief understanding about the category. Why do we have categories and not transaction types? Okay, well, transaction types is, for example, service fees, bank charges, forex charges, etc. And they can all go under one transaction, one category, which happens to be called bank charges, or happens to be called accounts payable in this case. And the reason we do that is because you might want to number them by category. So for example, if you look at the previous slide, we've got deposits and we've got auto number on here. So what happens is, in that category, all the deposits will be numbered in sequence using the same prefix. And of course, there's multiple different transaction types under deposits. So we couldn't define it by transaction type. We had to give you a better way of grouping it together. So we allow you to then auto number everything that comes in as deposits, everything that comes in, and they can have their own sequence number. And that sequence is very nice, because when you look at your cash book and you look at the way it deposits, you'll see it nicely listed in your reference in the cash book itself. Very neat. You never have to then, we had amazing, this, why I did this is because when we got data from your clients, we had to maybe fix a bug, or we had a problem, we'd get your data from the client. And the client would be entering a batch. And when they entered the batch, they wanted a unique reference. And they would use a reference, a deposit, for example. And then the next day, now they have to use another reference for that deposit. But of course, they've used deposit. So what they then put in is deposit exclamation mark, or deposit 1, or deposit tilde. And they'd make up another reference because they wanted it to be unique. So I thought, when you bring in a batch of deposits now using RecX, let us do the numbering for you, and it'll keep it in a nice sequence for the client. And that's why we added the auto numbering and the prefix and the next number. We've taken it one step further. That is a generalized number. So you can have one category for one set of numbers, okay? And then each transaction, if you want to, you can individualize them and give them their own prefix and individualize those and have another number that will override the general number. So you can have a general number for most of the transactions in a category, and within the same category, you can individualize certain transactions and give them their own number. So it's very flexible with the numbering system. And what you do is, I don't know if you've noticed, if you run RecX, you can actually click at the bottom, there's a renumbering button. And what it does, this is the most fancy part I like, and that is it goes and looks in the cash book at the last number that it's got for like DPO 963, and it says, right, your next number now will be 964. So it looks in the cash book already of posted transactions and picks up the next number for you, which is really great for you. So you don't ever run out of numbers. I run out of being it in sequence. Okay, so that's a powerful feature in the renumber. Yes, what's wrong?
Yeah, Jean has 2 questions. I think you answered the first one, but let me just say it. What takes preference, the auto numbering prefix and number for the category, or per line? And then his second question is, by indicating the auto numbering on the category, does one then leave the information per line empty?
Okay, so the auto numbering at the top takes preference. It doesn't take preference. It's the individual line. So if the individual line says no numbering, okay, it will use the auto number at the top. Okay, because that's a generalized number for the whole category. But if you've got auto numbering on the line itself as yes, it will use that line's auto numbering. Okay, so yeah, so it's generalized for the top there, which is this here. This is a general number for the whole category. And each line, okay, each line, let me go here, get a bit more specific, okay. So we've got here, let's go to, so let's use this. Let's just do this for us. Let's go here. So let's give an example. So here we've got bank charges. Okay, so if we say auto number, okay, let me go to my actual sample I've got for the sample data. Okay, right. Okay, let's go to bank charges. Okay, so bank charges has already, sorry, that's AP, sorry, bank charge. Bank charges has got a general number for BCHG. And BCHG, okay, starts at that number. Okay, and that is for all these transactions in the category, okay, that have auto number, sorry, whoops, that have auto number no. Okay, but this guy, I wanted to have his own number, his own individualized number, which is NedLink. And what we've done there is we've said auto number yes. So this one will use CCNO, and the next number for itself, and not that number. And that's how it works. Okay. Now, we want to go one step further with our next version. When I was doing this with NatDS, I thought we should also have maybe a generalized source code and a generalized GL account. So what you could do with the bank charges category, you could actually add, for example, a source code that's general, like BC, and the GL account, bank charges. And then everything, you wouldn't have to go into each one of these, because I mean, NetBank's got so many. And you have to, at the moment, you've got to go like this. You've got to go BC, like this. You see, so if we have a general source code and a general account code, then all of these, you wouldn't have to enter each one like this. It would automatically go to BC 6110 or whatever. And that's what I'm thinking of for the next version. Okay. But yeah, so let's just quickly recap. Auto numbering general is used if you have no in your auto number by line. Okay, does it answer the question?
Yes, he says thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, great question. I love questions. Cool. Okay, so that's why we use categories, which is an important factor. So you can have unlimited categories and unlimited numbering. I will show you how you maintain your categories in a minute. Okay, cool. Right. So here we've got an equal, let's recap, an equal and courtyard. Okay, so that's pretty simple. But now most, like I said, most, like a quick recap again, most entries come with a mixture of description, and that's why we have a like, and the xside is a word, and it will look for the word xside and not just that. Okay, that is the like command. Now, we have all these other ones, which I don't use much of because I don't have it very often. It gets even more specific. You might want to get more specific. We have an equal question mark. So the equal question mark says it's got to have cable, it's got to have 2023 in it, and it's got to have an 01 at the end. The middle bit can be 01, 02, 03, 04, 05. So this is a good one example because what we've got here is cable, the year, the month, and the day. So here we go again. That equal with the question mark gives you a more specific description and a much more specific wildcard. Okay. The next one is the like with the question mark. Okay. Again, the like means that the word cable must exist. There must be 4 digits after it, but at the beginning can be anything. Again, more flexible. But like I said, I don't use these very often because I just use the like command. I can't lie to you. It's not. We added these just for completion, to be complete. You know what I mean? To give you more specifics. Right. Okay. So those are the compare methods we use. Okay. And any questions before I move on from the compare methods? We have added 1 or 2 new features, which I'll mention at the end. Okay. Any questions? No. Right.
There's no
okay.
questions.
No questions. Yeah. Okay. Right. Now, once you have set up your like and you set up your way of matching the transaction, you can then add your defaults. Okay. So when you create a rule, you're allowed to then set up and say, if it's this like command and it picks up this particular transaction, I want the following values to be added to it when it imports it. Okay, so you can add your source code, your GL account, your tax tracking information, taxable, non-taxable, entry description if you want, which I don't use much, okay, to make it a default description. And you can also add distribution sets, and like one distribution set for one transaction will then create multiple lines for you in the batch. Okay, and you can also say to it, if it's this particular value in the reference, it must go to certain customers or vendors. And obviously, because we're going to now go to AR and AP, we also allow you to set up a way of how to allocate the money that's coming in for that transaction. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so let me just go backwards, and I'm going to show you backwards, okay? Because I want to show you here. Now, if you look at my AP slide, you can see what we've done here is we've said to it, if it's got if it's a transaction code of 64, it must lie, and the lie command picks up Xside. Okay, it knows that the default for that is Xside batteries, and it will pick up the actual vendor itself. So I'm going to go live on this one and show you what that looks like. Okay, so right, so here we go. Okay, so let's go back here. Like I said to you, this is the same as our sample data. So all of this is in the sample data and is exactly the same, and you can use it for your demos to your clients or for training. I love it for training because if they can do a training and they bring in the sample data and they can then look at the matching, how it works, they can get to know how the product works. Okay, so here we go. So there's the account payment. There's 064. It's a like command. It picks up Xside. Okay. It then knows the source code is AP. The account code, by the way, although there is one in here, is irrelevant. It doesn't use this account code because it uses the clearing account, as you well know. Also, the tax information is irrelevant. You can ignore that because it uses the AP taxing. Okay, and you can see the entry descriptions accounts payable. Okay, and it will pick up the vendor number of 1350. And if you remember correctly here, it's got an invoice number in it. Okay, so what I'm saying is pick up the actual MISC vendor, whatever, and then use the invoice number, document number when you auto allocate. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of different allocation methods you can use, which I'll show you in the next slide. That's pretty powerful. Often I just use like a prepay. Sometimes it's just a prepay. Sometimes it's balance brought forward for accounts receivable. Okay, use an auto number for the individual line. Because remember, that's got to be unique in accounts payable by line, by vendor. And you can use a numeric value because remember, you can't use a prefix in accounts payable. It's got to be numeric. And there's the next sequence number. So it'll create that number in accounts payable. It creates the batch, allocated automatically to the document number for that particular vendor using a particular rule. I thought that was pretty cool. Okay. So that's now matching with accounts payable automatically. Okay. You can see we've also got accounts receivable as well, but I'm going to just go here. Okay, so that's now for the allocation. So let's go to the first one. Now, often you have a transaction that comes in from the bank, and that transaction is made up of multiple lines. So here we've got a rent check coming in, and here we've got breakdown. Now, if you've noticed something in this particular description of this distribution set, you look at this. It's got parking, but it's got 0. Okay, there's the cleaning service. There's the rent for the office space. The point of this 0 is when it brings in the amount, maybe it's 1,500 Rand, the remaining amount must go to the parking, because that fluctuates. In most cases, it's not the parking that fluctuates. It could be the electricity bill or another charge. And the whole idea there is the balance of the entry must go to that particular amount and make up the distribution set to add balances. and therefore it balances to the bank. So there's a bit of flexibility available in the distribution set. Okay, so if you look at the distribution sets, see, we have rent. Okay, just looking here for a simple amount, default. Okay, cool. Okay, so that's the whole point of the distribution set, having a zero amount. It'll pick it up and put the balance there. The total distribution is 1319 normally. Okay, so that gives you a bit of flexibility when you create your distribution set. Any questions on distribution sets? Because I know it is quite interesting, this one. Okay. No, so far so good. I don't know if I'm showing you anything new. I don't know if you all know this already, but I'm sure one or two are finding more. Okay, so let's go deeper. So when you bring in a transaction with a rule and it's matched to accounts payable, you can also say to it how to allocate the money that's coming in. And here we have a whole bunch of different ways of allocating. Or to allocate it to the document number, like the X-side I showed you earlier, or to allocate it to the document date. Okay, so it will pick up the date of the transaction and allocate it to the transaction in your list of invoices for your vendors and allocate to that particular date. And auto allocate to the document due date. So if there's a due date for an entry and it brings it in from the bank, it can actually allocate it to that due date. If you don't know what to allocate it to, you can say to just allocate it as a prepay. It'll create the next prepay. If you want to know, if you know the amount is always the same, you can then tell it to allocate it to the equal amount, or look for an invoice with that amount and allocate it to that invoice. And then finally, if you know the document numbers in the reference, you can tell it to allocate it to that particular document number. So what it does there is, if you noticed, X-side had invoice and then dash, it had the vendor. So you're going to say to me, but how did it know that the beginning was the invoice number? What we do there is we look at the invoice number in accounts payable, we use that as a contains or like, and then look for that number inside the reference. And if the invoice number is, for example, let's go back to it, I like going backwards. In this case, the invoice number is IN135092. It will pick up the invoice number from AP and then look for that number in this reference, excluding the X-side wording and the dash. And that's how it picks up the correct invoice number. That is the most powerful way of doing an allocation. So if your client is told that they must enter the invoice number, forget about, and maybe, sorry, the invoice number and the customer description or any description afterwards, it will know who the vendor is and it will know which invoice for it to pay. So that's a good idea. Now, people say, but how do I get the client to do this? There are ways in the bank that you can get them to do this. And one of them is if you have a method of payment that you want the client to set, to be told how to pay, what you do is you get hold of your bank and you ask them to set up a beneficiary that is, what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? A standard, an approved beneficiary. Anybody, any client can become an approved beneficiary. And the approved beneficiary tells the bank how the client must enter their reference. And for like R1.50 extra charge on a bank charge, that approval beneficiary now forces the client, when they do a payment, to use an exact format of what they have to do. Now, you have to do that when you do a telecom account. When you pay your telecom account, there's a reference on your invoice. And that is what you have to enter in your reference, in your beneficiary description. If you don't, it won't accept the entry in the bank. Okay, it won't let you save it as a payment. And the client can do that. So if the client says, I want to have invoice number and a vendor number, they can force the vendors to enter their, they can force their customers, their customers, to enter it in that format. Okay. And that applies to you when the client's paying somebody else. If they're going for an approved beneficiary, like when they're paying, like I said, Telcom, and there's a few others that they have to pay, SARS, etc. It's got to be in a certain format. And that's called an approved beneficiary that you can get the bank to do. And that then allows you to have a specific description in the reference. And that description has to be entered in a certain way. And then you can set up a rule in RecXpress that picks it up and says, right, if it comes from that client, it must allocate it to that customer. And if it allocates to that customer or vendor, it must then do it by invoice number, because it's set up in that manner. Now, this X side here, we are going to add a new feature in the future. Might be in the future, we're going to add the customer number. And what you're going to be able to say to it when you do the drop down of the AR8P here, okay, this is going to be a new feature I'll talk to you about in a second. So when you do your here, and you drop down here, the entry type, you're going to add accounts payable, and we're going to call it vendor, accounts receivable customer. And what it then do is we'll pick up the customer number in the transaction and also do an allocation for you without you having to enter the customer number here. We'll do it for you. We're just working on how to get that working. Okay, that's looking at the future. I'm not going to go there now in much more detail than that. Cool. Right, so we've been through all of these. We've also done now the allocation methods, okay, and we're now going to give you a summary. So before I go into this, that's basically a very good idea of how to do a rule in detail, how to do the vendor rules, how to do the customer rules, how to do distribution sets, and how to set up defaults. I'm going to show you how to enter a rule from RecX next. But before I go there, I want you to look at this flow chart. Okay, so here's your template. Okay, when you bring in the transaction from the bank, it goes 3 different matchings here. It either matches the entry perfectly for you with a transaction in your cash book, or it's no match, meaning there's nothing in your cash book, or it's matched it with an error. Okay, so you could have brought in a transaction that you've entered differently to the bank. It will pick up the reference and match it with errors. Okay, if it matches it properly, it can match it by reference, it can match by amount, more than amount, one amount, or you can do your own matching once it's brought it in, and as we call it many to many. So one to bank, bank to one, you know what I mean? Many statement to one entry, many entries to one statement, or many statements to many entries. And that's your own matching that you can do on the matched level. Okay, that's matching. But that matching means it won't create it in the batch. It's already in the cash book. Okay, no match. Let's go match with error first. Match with error, we'll bring it in, find the entry and say, hold on, we have a variance or maybe 1 cent or 5 cents, and it will allow you to create a variance batch of the difference. Okay, it will use the same reference of this one. Okay, then the last one is your no match, and the no match is using the rules, and therefore you have no match. It looks for the rule within the categories, sets up the default values, lets you renumber the entries when you create, before you create the batch, lets you create the batch and post it. Okay, so this one creates a batch for you. This one creates a variance batch for you. That's the differences. And of course, this one just matches the entry. Okay, so when you create the batch, you post the batch, and then you can post your reconciliation to your cash book, and it should have done a proper recon, balanced your bank. You can go to the beach. Okay, so that's the idea of RecX. And let's put it this way, you might not even have entered anything here. Sorry, go back. Sorry. You might not have entered anything here. You might bring in a brand new bank statement, and it might just have rules like I do with my Visa. I don't enter anything with my Visa. It's got rules, and I bring in all the transactions, and it creates one batch for me for those transactions and posts, and I balance my Visa. So there's not even any entries required. There can be 0 entries in your bank. Now, this is a great thing to use when you do your take on. You might want to bring in previous months. So you might say, I want to start at the beginning of February or March, because that's my year, beginning of my year, but I only sold the product in June. So you say to them, no problem, we can import from March to June. And it will create your cash book for all those months without entering one transaction. That's pretty powerful stuff. Okay. And that's the template that we use. This is the actual format. I mean, the actual flow chart. Pretty useful to look at. Cool. Right. So now, just quickly, one other feature we have, which is not often used by people, is that you have bank charges and you have deposits. And then you find in your bank charges, you've got the wrong transaction codes. Okay. On the left is bank charges category, and on the right, we have deposit category. And we will find that maybe the one transaction code is in the wrong category. So all we do is we click on the transaction code, hit the arrow, and it puts it into the other category. And that is how you would do category maintenance and affect your categories. Okay, so let's have a look here. Just for fun. So the charges, I have checks. I look here and I go, oh, staff canteen must be in checks, not in bank charges. Boom, done. Okay. So now, where's it gone? It's somewhere in here. Love it. I never know. It is in there, trust me. So quick, it just does it like that. So let's get a bit more specific. Travel. Okay, there we go. Here's a travel. There we go. Com travel 073. Let's keep track of this one for a change. 073. There it goes. Boom, done. So this is how you would maintain your categories and get it perfect. Okay. Great. Almost come to the end. What's the time?
1 minute till 11.
Wow. Excellent. Okay, so briefly, we have what we call the other category. Now, I know this is going to take another 2-3 minutes, but just bear with me for a minute. This is the most important category, because when you start first time, you don't have rules. And what happens is they all go to a category which we set up that you don't, and it has to, you can't add more than one rule to it. You can't even, you can just create defaults for one rule. And that's why we do it on purpose, because we want you to take what's in other and put them into the rules. So what we do is we allow you to then go into the other category, which is not matched to any rule, change the defaults, and then change the category in the other, and it will automatically add it to the rule. So that's power. That's how you will create all your new ones, your new transactions. All entries do not have rules, go to other. You can then edit the transaction in other and setting up a default. You then change the category, and it will allow you to move it to that category. Once the rule has been added to the category, it will prompt you automatically to edit the rule. Okay, for example, I've got a good example. I'm getting my coffee. I go to bootlegger, but some days I go to bootlegger Backhoven, and some days I go to bootlegger to Kai. So when you change the category, you can then edit the rule and just use the word bootlegger and remove the word Backhoven and Takai. And it will then be a like command for generalized bootleggers, and then it goes to your coffee expense. Okay, and just use that word. After adding the rule, you can then say to it in the other transactions, or hit the refresh, look for bootleg in all the transactions and move them over into that category you've just created the rule. Every month there'll be less and less other transactions because you'll keep adding them as rules. Okay, so quick demo. I know we're over time, but really it's worth just watching for a minute, and Natalie might have to help me here. I like to have a bit of fun here, Nat. Okay, so I've just closed that. Okay, so let's go here. So I go to RecXpress. If I get stuck, I'll ask you. CTAC, okay. And now I go to my RecXpress. Okay, I go to other. Okay, it picks up other. Now you can see I've got all these OTs here. Okay, so I go to this one, and this is very important here. You must always add your defaults first before you change the category. Okay. I love the way you've hidden all the. That's fine. I'm going to just hit the restore, but I don't need to. Okay, so now I've got a GL account there, petty cash, and of course auto number. Is irrelevant. Irrelevant. I'm not going to have auto number. Oops. There we go. That was interesting. Okay, so now I'm going to do is I'm going to change the category from other to Forex. Adds it to Forex. And then go there. It says, do you want to add it to Forex? I say yes. Do you want to edit it? I say yes. It opens Forex. It puts it in on the line for me. There's it. Like. I then go here. I change the reference to OT. All right. Save it. Close. Hit the refresh. Whoops. That's behind my phone here. Sorry. Refresh. Move all of them to Forex. Gone. But don't worry about that one. That was not part of that matching. Okay, so when I go to Forex now, they're all here. So next month they come in, they'll all go to Forex. Now those is interesting. That's good. They all had yes on. So Natalie, please next time put them as no.
Yes.
The auto number is actually working because this auto number here is picked up from the default. So just quickly let me tell you, that's correct because they are auto numbered because they're picking it up from Forex. And Forex had a generalized, okay, auto number. There, you see. Okay. So it would have picked up Forex and given it the next number. Okay, now you can see that number next. That next number now is incremented because the last one was 131. So that one's now 132. Yeah. So that worked perfectly. Okay. So now you might say to me, no, but I don't want that one to be numbered. You can now change it here if you want to a different prefix if you want. Great. That's how you add your rules. Okay. And you keep adding them as you go along. Every month, add new rules, add new rules. We're adding one. I love it on the fly. I always think of the fly. Right. Okay, so that's the end of my things, and I'm not asking any questions, okay? But let me just tell you before you go, we're going to add 2 new features in RecXpress in the new version. And one of them is going to be you don't have to add a transaction code. You can just enter a like command, and it'll go across all transaction codes, and just use the like command, which is quite useful when you do a generalized description that can go across transactions. And the other one is we're going to add where it will pick up the vendor number from the bank statement, not have it pre-entered. So that gives you more flexibility as to when you enter a deposit or a payment, it'll go to the correct vendor from the vendor, from the reference from the bank. Okay, just last thing, we've got all these things set up in our Peresoft TV. All these demos are available. You can download, look at them, blah, blah, blah. Right. Final questions or comments. And I take compliments as well if you want to compliment. Please don't rush.
Then I compliment you.
Oh, thank you. Being my daughter, I expect a really nice one, eh?
I thought that was great.
Oh, good. I think that was a good description. Love it, Nat. I think it was a very good overview of the rules in RecXpress. Our next training will be a recap on automatic downloading, setting up EFT, etc., 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 etc. Okay, and don't forget we're doing another presentation with Sage on the 13th of Feb. We're redoing this again at 6 p.m. on the 1st, I think, of Feb. Am I right, Nat?
Yes.
Okay, we post all of these now on the on the 300 ecosystem, so that's all available for you to get from there. This presentation will be uploaded in amongst all the other ones for you to recap and go through it. We've also got one on the demo. We've also got one on how to run the demonstration, how to download, how to install. So we've got pretty much everything covered for you and to help you in the future to give the client, which I believe is one of the best solutions to your cash book. Great. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I really appreciate it and listening to me. And thank you, Nat, for looking after me and looking after the presentation. And it's always nice connecting to everyone every now and again and hearing all the Skinner, etc., etc. And we'll hopefully have another meeting soon with Mitch. and take it from there. Thank you all very much. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.